1. Arcane Codex. Needles of pain jabbed at his temples. His mind was hazy, his body lidden, the classic paralysis that follows a bad sleep. Lin Fan opened his eyes. The view was wrong. It wasn't the cracked monitor of his battered old PC, the smell of takeout and instant noodles that always lingered in his cramped rental. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar. The air smelled of mold and disinfectant. He tried to push himself up, but his arms felt weak and uncooperative. A wave of exhaustion rolled through him, deeper than the sluggishness after an all-night gaming binge, even though his head still buzzed. When he looked down, he saw small hands and feet. A single thought detonated in his mind. This body isn't mine. Had he transmigrated? Fragments slammed together. 10 years of another life. Brief, bitter memories of an orphanage, of children who bullied one another more out of fear than malice. Overlaid on those were Lin Fan's own 20-something years, the last image a pirated game's launch screen for Arcane era, and the fierce electric shock from his machine. He had died in his dingy apartment when the leaky computer finally gave him a fatal jolt, and now his soul had been transplanted into the body of a 10-year-old mixed-race orphan who had just succumbed to an incurable fever, needle marks still stinging on the arm. A voice inside him, calm as if settling an account, whispered, "From now on, I'll be Jason." Having gained more than a decade of life felt like windfall. He'd had enough of grinding existence and unpaid toil in his previous life. Now the year was 1990 in Britain, an era he'd only seen in history books and old movies. Cold pressed in from under the thin blanket, the last heat in his body made his trembling feel both feverish and instinctive. Before he could fully absorb any of it, a translucent, dark blue interface unfolded in his mind. It was clear and real, overlaying the dimness in his vision, the Arcane Codex. 4 ancient runes glowed faintly, etched into his consciousness like small, constant stars. The Codex, the core system of the pirated single-player game he'd been playing, had come with him, transformed from data into something tangible. With a thought, the interface shifted. A personal attribute panel blinked open, cold numbers offering the only warm hope in this bleak reality. Name Jason Lester, soulbound. Race, human, mixed blood. Age, 10. Rank, 0. Mental strength, 18. Constitution, 4 mana, 3. Talents, memory palace, soul talent. Dexterous hands, soul talent. Exceptional comprehension, soul talent. His eyes snagged on mental strength, 18. That was far above an ordinary child's level. The average adult was around 10. Maybe it was the result of the two souls overlapping. More information poured into him like clear water. Arcane mana was not the same as the mana used by ordinary wizards. Traditional wizardly mana focused on linking the mind to external elements. Spellcasters who relied on it were often physically frail and vulnerable in close combat. Arcanists, however, had long since refined meditation and mana circulation, upgrading the quality of their mana. Arcane mana could nourish the mind and subtly bolster the body. High-ranking arcanists, it was said, could be as physically powerful as dragons, delivering bone-crushing blows to any fool who tried a sneaky close-range attack. That thought made his pulse stutter with excitement. This wasn't just survival. It might be a path to real strength. The 3 soul talents were outrageous. Memory Palace let him remember every detail. Dexterous hands gave him exceptional manual skill. Exceptional comprehension meant he could learn anything far faster than normal. Coupled with Arcane Mana's body-enhancing properties, Jason's shabby beginning suddenly looked generous. He couldn't help smiling. This is a heavenly start, he thought, and forced himself to stay calm. He opened the rank 0 spell list. Mage Hand, Light, Message, Water Ball, Spirit Guiding Meditation. His gaze fixed on Spirit Guiding Meditation, the key to unlocking deeper power. Without hesitation, he chose it. Enlightenment hit like a current. Following the technique's description, he began to meditate. Elemental particles that had been invisible seeped into perception, blurry at first, then sharpening into distinct motes. He guided them inward. A faint warmth formed in his core and slowly spread. This was high-quality arcane mana, converted and circulating. It cleared his mind and injected a subtle vitality into the frail body. When Jason opened his eyes, there was a steadier depth to his gaze. He felt the changes, slow, real improvements. Over the next few days, his body recovered significantly. If he wanted to experiment or train as an alchemist, he would need private space. The inheritance left by the boy's parents might buy him that. Plans began to take shape. He went to see matron Mrs. Martha with a calm voice and a composure beyond his years. "Mrs. Martha," he said, "I'd like to donate half of my parents' inheritance to the orphanage." Mrs. Martha looked surprised. She lifted her brows and scrutinized him. Jason continued evenly. "As for the rest, I'd like to use it to buy books and study materials. I'll show you exactly what I buy each time." He kept his tone obedient, then shifted to a softer, childlike plea. "Also, Mrs. Martha, I need a quiet single room. I've just recovered from a serious illness and should rest properly, and I need a place to read and study without being disturbed." He hesitated a beat, then added carefully, "I heard some rooms on the side connect to a small old cellar or storage space below. If I could have a room like that, it would be wonderful. I could keep things down there so they don't take up space." He mentioned it as if casually curious, but he'd already identified several rooms with subterranean spaces by subtle probing and quiet observation. Mrs. Martha's expression softened. She said slowly, approvingly, "It's good that you think so practically." Chapter 2. Digging a Basement. Mrs. Martha's perpetually stern face seemed to soften. Her patience with this child had grown. Jason used that to his advantage. He gained nominal control of the inheritance and a bedroom that could be locked from the inside. Under the bed, he'd hollowed out an entrance leading to a tiny cellar. With money in hand and a private space beneath his feet, a plan began to take shape. Through the orphanage's procurement channels, he asked Mrs. Martha to buy items from a list in batches: lime, a primary alchemical material; silver for refining mithril; copper, a few artificial glass crystals; assorted metal parts, and several cheap glass containers. "For some interesting scientific experiments," he told her. Mrs. Martha frowned as she looked over the list. "Saltpeter? That's not safe, Jason." "Just a small amount, ma'am," he said, looking up with an innocent, curious expression. "The book says that mixed with sulfur and charcoal, it can produce very beautiful pigments. I want to try painting." He'd made up a tentative alchemical explanation, sure she wouldn't press the matter. She didn't ask more, though a flicker of confusion passed through her eyes when she saw the items. Jason didn't elaborate. When the packages arrived, he moved them into his room discreetly. Most hidden under the bed, the more important pieces passed down through the small opening into the cellar. Late at night, while the orphanage slept and only the children's steady breathing filled the halls, Jason bolted his door and lifted the creaky floorboard by his bed. The hole beneath was just large enough for a slender body. Even stooping, he had to squeeze through. A rush of cold, earthy air came up from below, tasting of damp wood and rot. He lit a narrow, white candle. The flame shivered in the stillness, then slid down into the darkness. The cellar was exactly as Mrs. Martha had described. The ceiling was so low he could almost touch it standing upright. The space was narrow, no more than 3 or 4 square meters. Half-rotted crates were piled against the wall, and a few broken planks leaned in a corner. The moldy, earthy smell was suffocating, but it was the place he needed. Jason didn't start the big excavation right away. He sat cross-legged and began with the basics. He drew on the arcane current within him, something that had strengthened slightly after days of private cultivation, and focused, probing a fist-sized clod of earth on the floor. "Fossil to mud," he murmured, the unfamiliar syllables steady beyond his years. Magic flowed out quietly. The clod trembled, then stilled. The power dissipated on contact, leaving the dirt unchanged. He wasn't discouraged. It was his first time performing a shaping spell in the real world. He closed his eyes and recalled the Arcane Codex's description. The trick was in the quality and form of the output, precise penetration rather than blunt force. Opening his eyes, he extended his palm and focused the magic into a fine thread, piercing the clod and spreading the energy slowly, imitating water seeping into soil. The edges softened first, then the center gave way, until the clod melted into a small puddle of wet mud. It worked. He exhaled, sweat beading on his forehead. Converting that single clod had drained nearly a third of his power. A weakness spread from deep within. The after effects of his past fever flared, his temples aching. The arcane path had no shortcuts. He spent the whole night cycling between exhaustion and meditation to recover. Each time his reserves slowly rebuilt, he felt subtle changes inside him. a faint increase in strength, muscles firming where before they had been only a suggestion. After several nights of secret labor, the tiny cellar had quietly altered its contours. He had become proficient with two spells, fossil to mud and earth to river. He guided the softened earth to a corner where he'd pre-dug a tiny outlet to the city's sewer. The excess soil flowed away without trace. Encouraged by steady success, he planned one final expansion that night, deepening the chamber to about 2 meters and extending it until the area reached nearly 20 square meters. Confidence slid into arrogance. He pushed more power into the fossil to mud spell to speed things up. Too much surged into the ground. The soil beneath his feet liquefied, losing all support. A hollow crack ran along the exposed side wall. Dust rained down, and he choked. The thought of being buried alive slammed into him. Instinct took over. He poured the last of his strength upward and forced the incantation through gritted teeth. Mud to stone. He shouted the fortifying words at the most unstable part of the collapse. The soggy earth rapidly dehydrated and solidified, hardening into rock-like texture as it set. The ceiling settled and the danger passed. Jason blacked out. He slid down the cold wall as his legs gave way, collapsing to the floor, gasping for breath. His heart pounded, not with triumph, but with the raw fear of having nearly died. The total drain left him weaker than any fever. Pain lanced through his limbs, and his vision wavered. He understood, painfully, that arcane energy fed his life as much as it did his spells. To overextend himself was to spend his own life force. He struggled to sit up when a faint creak sounded above, the unmistakable sound of the floorboard he'd deliberately left unset. Someone was moving on the exact spot above him. Every hair on his body rose. He forced his hand to the candle and snuffed it out with his last strength. Darkness closed over the cellar. He pressed himself into a corner, holding his breath until it felt like his lungs might collapse, and stilled his heartbeat as best he could. Footsteps stopped directly overhead, right on the floorboard. 3 puppet and unexpected letter. Jason could hear his own blood thudding in his ears. He imagined whoever stood above him lowering their head and studying the slightly uneven floorboards. Everything around him fell silent. He froze, even holding his breath. Any movement could betray him. If the hollowed basement were discovered, he might have to use a memory erasing spell, and his magic was too crude for precision. It could easily turn someone into an idiot. Time stretched. Perhaps a moment, perhaps longer. Footsteps finally reappeared above, then moved slowly away down the corridor until they faded. He was safe. Jason's rigid body loosened. He leaned against the wall, his thin clothes soaked with cold sweat. He waited in the dark a little longer to ensure there was no more movement outside, then with trembling fingers, relit the candle. The flickering flame threw his pale face onto the rough stone. Tonight's work had to end. Now wary of discovery, he cast careful spells to reinforce the remaining walls and the floor. This time, he controlled the flow with extreme caution. Under the glow of magic, the whole underground space solidified. His secret basement, dug directly beneath his bedroom with a hidden entrance, was at last taking form. Deep underground, the air felt heavy and stale. A faint draft carrying an odd, musty smell came through the conduit connected to the sewer. The next day, the basement smelled of earth and rock. With a faint crackle, the magic gathered at Jason's fingertips suddenly surged out of control. A newly carved rune on the stone surface shattered, showering dazzling sparks. A painful backlash of energy coursed from his fingertips up his arm, leaving half his body numb. He had failed. A burnt smell hung in the air. Jason shook his numb hand and stared at the charred mark burned into the core stone, brows drawn tight. This was his third failure, wasting not only magic but also the special stones containing trace metals he had painstakingly gathered. He didn't rush a fourth attempt. He closed his eyes and, in his memory palace, replayed the entire process in slow motion. He dissected the energy output at each node, the connection of every circuit. The problem was energy overload. After a month of cultivation, his arcane magic was purer than most wizards, but his 10-year-old body could not yet wield it with delicate precision. The powerful output made tiny operations difficult. He changed the core design. Setting aside the standard model from the Arcane Codex that prized efficiency, he sketched a more complex but fault-tolerant redundant circuit. This time, he condensed the magic into an extremely fine beam and probed it gently into the core stone. The runes lit one by one, their glow stable and soft. No flicker this time. The stones forming the construct rubbed and shifted, emitting dull creaks that grated on his nerves. A figure about half a meter tall, lit by arcane light, pushed itself up from the pile of stones and stood heavily. Its movements were stiff, every step making the ground tremble as if it were rooted to the earth. Jason let out a long breath and pulled a cloth pouch from his satchel. Inside were two glowing stones he had refined through alchemy. He walked forward and set them into the reserved grooves in the stone man's head. A faint white light glowed, 2 points of light stabilized within the stone figure's skull. "You shall be called Stone One," he whispered. The rock-formed head tilted slightly, and the 2 points of light flickered as if acknowledging the name. With Stone One, the tireless strongman, the expansion of the underground laboratory accelerated. Huge stones that had once given Jason headaches could now be moved into place by Stone One's thick rock arms. Jason could focus on delicate work, using a spell to turn mud to stone and reinforce passages, carving basic runes on the walls, ceiling, and floor. Soundproofing runes kept the noise of excavation from escaping. Structural stability runes turned the space into a solid fortress. Most important, he set up a basic warning array. The secret base pushed deeper into the earth and widened at a visible pace. It was becoming Jason's most secure stronghold in this world. Early one morning, before dawn, Jason was finishing the final debugging of Stone One's core circuit, trying to squeeze out a little more efficiency, when a tremor rippled at the edge of his mind. The warning rune by the entrance triggered. He froze. Something was in his bedroom. It wasn't Mrs. Martha. He knew her footsteps. Nor was it the other children. They should have been asleep at this hour. Jason extinguished the glowing stones, plunging the basement into total darkness. He held his breath and silently crawled up the secret passage to the bedroom, pressing his eye to the observation slit. Perched on the windowsill was an owl. Every feather was neatly groomed. It stood with a dignified poise. In its talons, it gripped a finely made parchment envelope. Jason felt a different kind of magic from the bird, distinct from his arcane currents. The owl seemed impatient and loosened its grip for a moment. The envelope slid smoothly onto the sill. Then the owl tapped its claw on the envelope 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was crisp and carried into the basement. Only after seeing that the visitor showed no hostile intent did Jason crawl out of the passage and restore the floor. He went to the window and picked up the letter. The parchment felt heavy and high quality. The wax seal bore an emblem he had seen only in deep memory from his previous life. A capital H surrounded by 4 animals, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. The address was written in elegant emerald ink in a single clear line. Orphanage, smallest bedroom, Mr. Jason Lester. His breath caught. How could an arcanist secretly studying the Arcane Codex at an orphanage receive such a letter pulsing with magical aura? Jason's fingers trembled as he broke the wax seal and unfolded the parchment. After skimming the polite opening, his eyes locked on the ornate script at the top. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. 4. This is a joke. Every word on the letter had been carved straight into Jason's mind. The Ministry of Magic's records said he came from a Muggle family. Because of that, a professor would be sent in 3 days at 9 in the morning to explain everything to his guardian. Hogwarts, Dumbledore, Lord Voldemort, Platform 9th the Force. Those names woke something in him. Scenes from movies and novels, hazy until now, slammed into his present like a cold wave. Images of the Dark Lord, his noseless face, and the killing curse rose up in his head. Jason felt dizzy. The corridor seemed to tilt. He gripped the oddly textured parchment until his knuckles went white and breathed the orphanage air, disinfectant and old wood, trying to steady his racing heart. He had to stay calm. This wasn't the time for hysteria or wild hope. Footsteps chattered through the empty hallway. Jason walked straight to Mrs. Martha's room. He wanted answers, even though he already half knew what they would be. Mostly, he wanted to see how the non-magical world would react to something it couldn't understand, how ordinary people pushed magic away. "Good morning, Mrs. Martha." He stood in the doorway, trying to sound like a 10-year-old who'd received a strange letter and was only mildly bewildered. "Got this. I got this. He handed her the envelope, which smelt of parchment. Mrs. Martha was bent over a faded sheet and looked up when he spoke. She took the letter, her eyes tracing the unfamiliar crest on the seal before she unfolded the thick parchment and read it carefully. Her expression shifted, confusion, then curiosity, a near laugh, and finally a gentle mixture of helplessness and pity. "Oh, Jason, my dear." She refolded the letter with exaggerated care, as if afraid of breaking it. "Which mischievous imp has played such an elaborate prank on you?" She handed it back, indulgence heavy in her voice. "A magic school? A professor coming in person?" She shook her head. The disbelief in her eyes was complete. Jason could see she was thinking he'd been reading too many fanciful stories. "I expect some careless child sent this to the wrong person. Still, it's quite realistic. You should show this to your friends. You need to mix with other children. Don't stay in your room all day. Get a little sun." "All right." Jason forced a look of childlike curiosity into his face. "Then I'll wait in the sitting room in 3 days. What if it's real?" Of course, you silly goose." Mrs. Martha's smile softened. "And wear more clothes. Don't catch a cold." He took the letter back. The parchment felt heavier than ordinary paper. He didn't argue. Pointless. Her reaction was exactly what he'd expected, and better than the worst-case scenarios he'd imagined. At least she hadn't declared him delusional. He said goodbye and returned to his small room, to the secret basement he kept hidden. The world had been very thorough in hiding itself from Muggles. Muggle-repelling charms could distort perception in subtle, complete ways. Jason sat on the cold bed edge, the house silent except for his breathing. His fingers traced the paper, feeling the emblem of the wax seal. Hogwarts, a formal acceptance. The thought wasn't bad. Compared to groping through the Arcane Codex alone, the school would offer systematic, comprehensive instruction. It would be safer and far more efficient than his lonely experiments. In a low-magic world with his cheat, maybe he could actually do what he wanted there. For the next 3 days, he stayed almost entirely in his room and the secret basement. He knew the professor would come exactly on time and would have to give Mrs. Martha an explanation she couldn't help but accept. All he could do was prepare. On the third morning, at 8, sunlight slanted across the dusty floor. Jason left his bedroom and stood in the hollow corridor on the ground floor, eyes flicking toward the courtyard gate, an iron barricade mottled with dark rust meant to keep the children inside. To him, it felt like a clear line between ordinary life and something impossible about to pass through. His heart beat faster than normal, sweat had gathered in his palms, and he kept wiping them on his faded trousers. Time stretched. The orphanage's usual clamor faded, even the birds outside seemed to hold their breath. Unusual silence wrapped the building. He watched the clock hand creep toward 9. 8:59. The last slow click sounded, and the world seemed to stop. Thump, thump, thump. 3 measured knocks came from the iron gate. They were not loud, but they cut clean through the morning hush and tightened Jason's chest. A serious female voice with a slight Scottish lilt carried through the walls. "Excuse me, is Mr. Lester here? I am Minerva McGonagall, a professor from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." 5. The professor arrives. It was a summer afternoon. Sunlight poured into St. Margaret's orphanage, the air heavy with the blended smells of disinfectant, cheap soap, and children's sweat. The office door creaked open, and a figure filled the frame, silhouetted against the brightness so that the light seemed to stop at her shoulders. She wore a dark green velvet robe, stood perfectly straight, and her face held the grave composure of someone used to being obeyed. Mrs. Martha, who had been bent over her ledger, looked up. Her usual kind smile froze on a face lined by years of hard work. "Who are you?" she asked, instinctively pressing a hand to the paperweight on her desk, the only thing nearby that might serve as a weapon. "Good afternoon. I am Minerva McGonagall," the woman said, every syllable clear and exact. "Deputy headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "What school?" Mrs. Martha frowned and adjusted her spectacles, suspicion sharpening her features. "I've never heard of it. If you're selling something, you can leave." Jason, waiting in the shadow by the bookshelf, had replayed this moment 100 times. Professor McGonagall's patience thinned, her eyes swept past Mrs. Martha and came to rest on him. "We sent a letter 3 days ago," she said. Mrs. Martha scoffed in dawning understanding, her tension easing into irritation. So that prank was your doing. I don't know what new kind of scam you're trying, but the orphanage will not take a single penny of this child's inheritance. Forget it. At that, Jason stepped forward. Mrs. Martha, I think we should hear the professor out, he said. McGonagall glanced at him with mild surprise. Mrs. Martha reacted like a mother. She pulled Jason behind herself, using her body as a shield. Jason, don't listen to her. There's no such thing as magic. Oh, really? McGonagall replied. She raised her wand and aimed it at an ordinary white ceramic cup on the desk, the kind stamped with the orphanage's name. Jason felt his attention sharpen, a strange, almost mechanical awareness in his mind. The Arcane Codex's analysis module, activated without him asking. Through that thread, he watched the energy leap from the wand tip in a chaotic, will-driven surge. In his mental sight, the cup's particles separated and reformed under an implacable force. Martha watched with growing disbelief as the cup trembled, twisted, and elongated. In the space of a heartbeat, the ceramic became feathers and a delicate beak, a living bluebird. It fluttered up, circled the office once, and trilled a crystalline melody. Mrs. Martha gasped, clapped a hand to her mouth, and sank back against her chair as if the sight had physically knocked the air from her lungs. The little bird settled back on the desk, and in a faint shimmer was the plain cup once more. Everything that had just happened folded back into ordinary appearance, but the memory of it hung in the room like smoke. Jason, you are a wizard, Professor McGonagall said quietly, breaking the silence. She addressed the boy who had been watching silently. Hogwarts is where young witches and wizards are taught and guided. You need a proper magical education. This is your talent, your path. Mrs. Martha stared at Jason, her expression complicated by years of care, habit, and sudden, reluctant wonder. Tuition, tuition, she muttered, voice trembling. The orphanage ran on the thinnest of margins. The thought of paying for a school that sounded like fantasy was unbearable. I have an inheritance, Jason said, answering the question before anyone else could. McGonagall's face softened. She plucked a parchment from her robe. It unrolled in the air by itself, the script elegant and unfamiliar to Jason, but a line of numbers at the bottom glowed faintly in gold. The sum was enough to make Mrs. Martha's eyes go wide. As you can see, Jason's parents left him a substantial inheritance, enough to cover tuition and living expenses during his time at Hogwarts, McGonagall said. Her tone warmed slightly. The headmaster has also offered a full scholarship. Hogwarts never turns away talent for lack of funds. She paused, then added, Moreover, upon learning of this, Mr. Jason chose to donate half of his inheritance to St. Margaret's, a generous and kind decision, one more reason we cannot refuse him. Mrs. Martha was struck silent, her face a mixture of shock, guilt, and relief. When she looked at Jason now, she saw not only the child who had lived under her roof, but someone who had made his own choices. She drew a long, trembling breath and, as if by habit, reached out with the rough, work-hardened hand that had tucked many children into bed. Her fingers found Jason's hair and smoothed it once. Go, she said finally, voice thick. Take care of yourself. After the farewell, Jason followed Professor McGonagall out into the world that held his memories of the life he'd been living. They threaded through a few narrow, grimy alleys and stopped at a dilapidated house with a sagging door that looked long abandoned. We can't appear on Muggle streets, Jason, McGonagall explained. The International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy binds us all. The existence of the magical world would be too great a shock. Jason nodded. The explanation matched the films he'd watched in his previous life and made the rules seem less like fantasy and more like law. McGonagall pushed the creaking door open. Dust and the sour smell of disuse rolled out. The room had a single fireplace, cold and unused. From her robe, she produced a small leather pouch and pinched out a handful of fine gray powder, which shimmered faintly in the air. This is flu powder, she said, handing some to Jason. It's a fast way to travel. Hold on tight. Your first time might be disorienting. Try to keep steady. She scattered a pinch into the hearth, stepped forward, and spoke a single clear word, leaky cauldron. A roar of emerald green flame shot up, 2 people high, blasting heat into the little room. McGonagall didn't hesitate. She stepped into the flame and was swallowed by it, her figure disappearing as if into a living doorway. The fire twisted and rippled into a strange passage, and from within the green light her voice called out, steady and commanding, "Jason, it's your turn." The world shattered into a riot of color and a tearing sensation that came from everywhere at once. Jason didn't fight the dizziness. He pushed his spirit-guiding meditation to its limit, extending it outward to grasp the chaotic spatial energy around him. The Arcane Codex in his mind refreshed frantically, analyzing spatial folding model, rough, directional anchor, unstable. Energy utilization rate, 13.4%. Conclusion, efficient but extremely unsafe method of transportation. To him, the Flu network looked like countless fragile strands of space, energy surging through narrow channels, held together only by the old runes at the fireplaces. He felt solid ground under his feet, and a gentle force spit him out of the passage. Unlike the usual bedraggled wizard who staggered from a Flu, Jason landed perfectly on both feet, rigid and composed. Professor McGonagall stood nearby, eyes bright with approval and a little astonishment at his steadiness. They had emerged into a dim pub, the air thick with sour fermenting ale, damp wood, and the bitter tang of some peculiar tobacco. In a corner, a few shabby wizards muttered to one another and shot unfriendly glances. McGonagall's presence drew most of the attention away. The authority of Hogwarts' headmistress kept petty trouble at bay. "Stay close," she said, and led him through the room without looking at anyone. As they passed, a tall, thin wizard with a greasy face bumped Jason as if by accident. An almost imperceptible magical ripple extended from the man's sleeve toward Jason's ankle, a tripped jinx. The spell vanished an inch from his skin as if hitting an invisible wall. The arcane magic from Jason's spirit-guiding meditation had generated a shield, rendering him immune to such crude tricks. The thin man's sneer froze. He didn't understand why his jinx failed. Jason stopped, turned slowly, and fixed him with a calm, cold stare. The man's scalp prickled under that look, as though everything about him was suddenly exposed. He took a step back, made a choked sound, and melted into the crowd. "What is it?" McGonagall noticed the pause. "Nothing, Professor. Just a cockroach scurrying across the floor," Jason said, and smiled when he lowered his gaze. McGonagall's face darkened slightly. She glanced in the direction the wizard had disappeared and then led Jason to the courtyard. They halted before an ordinary brick wall. McGonagall tapped a particular pattern with her wand. 3 up, 2 across. The bricks rotated and slid aside on their own, opening a widening, arched passage. Sunlight and the noise of a bustling street spilled through. Diagon Alley. Jason's eyes widened. The Arcane Codex overlaid a light blue filter across his vision. Thin, active elemental particles dancing in the air, several energy nodes on the concealment array, covering the street dim with disrepair. He could even distinguish the sulphurous tang from a cauldron shop, the slight acidity of owl droppings from a pet emporium, and a sweeter waft from a distant sweet shop. The world felt vivid and dangerous. Elop's Owl Emporium, Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, Ollivanders, he murmured, naming the shops like inventory items, each a resource he needed. "We'll go to Gringotts first," McGonagall said, pointing to the white marble bank that dominated the end of the street. As they approached, goblin guards in scarlet livery glared at them. Jason's senses registered something that wasn't wizardry, an ancient, metallic force, bound up with contracts and gold, cold, greedy, immensely powerful. The Arcane Codex annotated the species in his mind, but Jason barely needed its labels to feel the difference. Inside the bank, the clang of coin and the rustle of ledgers filled a tense, efficient hall. McGonagall spoke to a serious-looking goblin with small, round spectacles. The goblin's gaze slid to Jason with obvious appraisal. "Another mudblood for a scholarship, is it?" the goblin said, contempt thick in his voice. McGonagall's expression hardened. "Griffook, mind your tone. This is Mr. Lester, a new student at Hogwarts." Griffook snorted and sent a cold probe toward Jason's mind, an ugly goblin way of peering into a client's thoughts. The moment it touched him, it struck an immovable barrier and shattered. Jason felt no effort. His memory palace was impervious. A small smile tugged at his lips. He looked Griffook in the eye. "The value of goblins depends on how much gold they can guard," he said evenly. "And the value of people depends on how much gold they can make goblins guard. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Griffook?" Griffook's arrogance froze into startled caution. The boy had not only blocked his probe, he'd summarized the fundamental relationship between goblins and wizards. The goblin said nothing more. He took a heavy leather money bag from beneath the counter and pushed it across. Scholarship. McGonagall's voice was steady, though she was clearly taken aback by the exchange. Jason accepted the bag and weighed it in his hand, estimating its amount almost at once and sketching a preliminary plan for how to use it. He looked up at McGonagall. "Professor, this should cover tuition and basic supplies. What about my parents' inheritance?" McGonagall blinked. She hadn't expected the 10-year-old to ask so directly. "Your inheritance is held in a trust vault by the Ministry of Magic. You won't have full access until you come of age, though you may be permitted to withdraw some interest each year." "Understood." Jason nodded. A new long-term goal settled into place: gain lawful control of that inheritance as soon as possible. He stowed the bag and turned back to McGonagall, eyes bright. "Professor, besides textbooks, I need to buy all the advanced books on ancient runes and alchemy. Shall we go to Flourish and Blots first?" 7. Buy books. Jason quickly took care of trivial matters like school robes and a pet, then headed straight for his real destination, Flourish and Blots. The shop smelled of old parchment and fresh ink. Tall shelves stretched up toward the dim ceiling, crammed with books of every size. He picked up the obligatory new textbooks, Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 among them, but their weight felt negligible. He needed a perfect excuse. His gaze slid past the beginner readings and went to the back of the store, to the dusty, dim-lit shelves. The Arcane Codex interface appeared in his vision, a pale blue stream of data overlaying the ancient volumes and rapidly filtering them. Major breakthroughs in modern magic. Value, low. Research on the genealogy of transfiguration. Error rate, 42%. Value, medium. On the origins of magic. Conjectures on pre-wand era casting. Author, Bathilda Bagshot. Weak energy fluctuations. Warning, contains a large number of unverified conjectures. This was it. An authoritative author and a book full of conjecture. The perfect cover. "Professor McGonagall," he said. "Besides the required textbooks, I'd like to buy this one," he added, pointing to the thick volume on the origins of magic. "I'm very interested in the history of magic, especially its earliest, most primitive forms." Professor McGonagall looked surprised. It was rare for a first year, new to the magical world, not to be obsessed with flashy spells, and instead to care about the dry origins of magic. "Why this direction?" she asked. "That part of the subject is rather obscure, even for older students." "Because I want to know why," Jason answered sincerely. "A beginner's guide to transfiguration teaches how to cast spells, but it doesn't say how the first wizards discovered transfiguration. In an era without wands or developed spells, what guided their power? I suspect the answer is hidden in the oldest histories." McGonagall was silent for a moment. She saw not childish curiosity in his eyes, but a stubborn search for underlying logic, a quality that reminded her of another student equally eager for knowledge. "The school library has a more comprehensive collection and is safer," she said eventually, but her tone had softened. "Are you sure you don't want to study there?" "I want to study ahead," Jason replied. She no longer objected, only nodded, a complex expression crossing her face. A thirst for knowledge is a good thing, and Miss Bagshot's book is worth reading. Their next stop was the potion ingredients shop. A pungent mix of rot and sulfur hung in the air. After Jason bought the standard items on the list, he didn't leave. Clutching Bagshot's book, he pretended to browse the rare goods in bottles and jars. Then, with deliberately feigned excitement, he shouted, "Professor, look, it's mentioned in here. Miss Bagshot speculates that in the pre-wand era, ancient wizards may have used special mediums to aid casting, magical ores, or the blood of powerful creatures." The stout shopkeeper pushed his thick spectacles up his nose and scoffed. "Children's fantasies. Magic is about talent and wands, not stones and blood." "But it makes sense, doesn't it?" Jason ignored him and turned to McGonagall, explaining in plain, childlike logic. "Just as drinking hot soup from a goblin-forged silver cup scalds you more than a wooden bowl, different materials react differently to heat. So wouldn't some materials react more strongly to magical energy? Maybe ancient wizards used that." The analogy was simple and intuitive, and it plainly resonated. McGonagall's expression shifted. She was struck by the insight, not a complex theory, but an observation-based leap. Encouraged, Jason pointed at several items on the shelf, his eyes bright. I want to experience it for myself. I don't need much, just a little. I want to feel whether dragon's blood really feels warmer in my hand than water. Does holding this black stone make it easier to focus? I'm not trying to cast spells, Professor. I just want to understand. The word understand touched McGonagall's core belief as an educator. Denying a safe way to explore would go against her instincts. The shopkeeper opened his mouth to protest, but McGonagall raised a hand. His idea, though unconventional, is not entirely without merit, she said slowly. However, in the realm of potions, one person's judgment matters above all. She turned to Jason, her face serious. Hogwarts potions master, Professor Snape, his knowledge and exacting standards for ingredients are beyond anything you can imagine. And I warn you, don't mention feeling the temperature of ingredients in his classroom. The shopkeeper, still rattled, jumped in. More than strict. Last supplier brought him a batch of unicorn hair. Professor Snape tapped it once with his wand. A silver strand floated up, and without even looking, he said, "The cell division cycle in these hairs is 0.3 seconds longer than standard. Are you trying to make a restorative that causes permanent localized paralysis?" Poor fellow, he twitches whenever he smells unicorn now. Jason felt a thrill. He had expected Snape to be serious, but not to demand such precision from suppliers. This could prove useful later. He lowered his eyes in just the right way and said, "I understand, Professor. I'll only do this research in my own time." McGonagall studied him for a long moment, trying to see through this unusual student. Then she addressed the nervous shopkeeper. "Give him the smallest quantity of each, as he requested." The shopkeeper wrapped a tiny packet of dragon's blood powder and a small pouch of obsidian powder in paper. Jason accepted them politely, his face open with the joy of a fulfilled wish. But beneath that innocent expression, unseen by anyone, a cold voice spoke inside his mind. "Disguise complete. First batch of basic components acquired. They are still playing with sticks and spells. I will take the first step toward true magic construction with materials they do not comprehend." Chapter 8. The Cheers of the Wands. Professor McGonagall led Jason through a maze of crowded cobblestone alleys and stopped before a narrow, time-worn shop. The gilt lettering on the sign was faded but still legible. Ollivanders, makers of fine wands, since 382 BC. The window was dusted with a thin film, a faint light seeping through to reveal row upon row of slender boxes packed so tightly they nearly reached the ceiling. McGonagall pushed open the door. The bell above it gave a soft, muffled chime. The air inside smelled of dry sawdust and old parchment, threaded with the faint, almost imperceptible tang of settled magic. From the dim recesses of the shop, a figure emerged. An old man, very thin, clad in simple dark robes. His irises were so pale they were almost white, his eyes seeming to pierce outward with a detached, searching light. "Good afternoon," he said in a voice as soft and drifting as dust. McGonagall inclined her head with a hint of respect. "Mr. Ollivander, this is Jason Lester, a new student this year." Mr. Ollivander turned his pale gaze on Jason. It felt as if the look reached into him, testing the surface of his mind. Jason sensed a subtle, invisible probe slide across his thoughts. He made no effort to guard against it and stood perfectly still, his heart steady. Vibrant," Mr. Ollivander said slowly, the investigation in his eyes deepening. He reached for a dusty box from a high shelf with nimble, precise movements. "Birch, dragon heartstring, 10¼ inches, quite flexible. Try it." Jason took the wand. It was warm in his palm, a gentle heat that tuned to the calm, arcane energy inside him. He flicked his wrist almost casually, and a small trail of silver sparks leapt from the tip, tracing a brief arc in the dim light, each spark unusually full and bright. Mr. Ollivander's eyebrows twitched. Surprise ghosted across his face. He drew another box down, darker in color, blew dust away, and announced, "Holly, phoenix feather, 11 inches, very springy." This wand felt more alive in Jason's hand. A livelier energy surged up the shaft, as if something dormant within his bloodlines stirred. The tip flashed red, the light warm enough to warm the air around it. For the first time, Mr. Ollivander's surprise was plain. His movements lost some of their usual leisurely calm and became brisk, focused. Box after box came down. oak with unicorn tail hair, a resilient wand that made a pleasing soft sound when waved, willow with dragon heartstring, hot to the touch, its sparks catching the dust in the air, ebony with dragon nerve, heavy and whooshing with every swing. Each wand, when taken by Jason, betrayed an astonishing compatibility. Tips shimmered in different hues. Some sent out sparks, others glowed softly or hummed, vibrating in harmony with the power inside him. The shop's atmosphere grew tense with the cascade of responses. Even the composed McGonagall watched with growing bafflement. She had never seen a young wizard react so well to so many wands. Then, faint and mechanical, a click sounded from a nearby shelf. A box slid a fraction, its lid nudged open. Another clicked, then a third. As if some signal had been tripped, thousands of slender boxes all over the shop began to tremble and hum. Dust fell in a quiet rain, light bent and warped, and lids popped open in rapid succession. "Merlin's beard!" McGonagall cried, instinctively stepping forward, her wand at the ready to shield Jason. She stopped short. Jason stood in the center of the commotion, utterly calm. Mr. Ollivander was stunned. The wand in his hand slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. His lips moved soundlessly as his weathered face took on an expression of a fanatic's mix of wonder and fear. "Impossible. This is impossible. All the wands," he whispered, voice shaking. "They're responding to you. They're cheering for you." Jason's gaze swept past the humming wands and landed on a forgotten corner of the shop, thick with dust. A single box sat there, still and silent, while everything else around it clamored. Jason raised a hand and pointed. "I want that one." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the resonance like a blade. Instantly, the shop fell into an uncanny absolute silence. Open boxes snapped shut. The humming ceased. Mr. Ollivander, as if waking from a trance, shuffled over, his face suddenly grave and pale. "No, child, not that one," he said. "Why?" Jason asked, calm. Ollivander did not answer, only approached with a kind of reverence. He dusted the box with his sleeve and lifted the lid with hesitant fingers. The wood of the box was almost black, smooth and undecorated, radiating a faint chill. Inside lay a wand of deep purplish black, the grain fine and subtle. It sat motionless, seeming almost lifeless. "Rosewood," Mr. Ollivander said, his voice dropping to an unusually serious tone. "Its core is very unusual. It has rejected every hand that's tried to lift it. It has lain here for nearly a century." He passed the wand to Jason. It was cold where Jason grasped it, and at once a power heavy with sorrow and death coursed into him. It pressed outward, then found balance. An equal pact struck with the supreme arcane energy within him. There was no fireworks, only an invisible pressure that made the air itself feel denser. McGonagall felt a sudden pang in her chest. The breath seemed harder to draw. "What is its core?" she asked. Mr. Pye. Ollivander fixed Jason with those pale, searching eyes, awe and concern mingling in his expression. "Thestral hair," he answered quietly. "Taken from the brain." He added gravely, "It will only accept those who have themselves seen death and can look upon it without flinching." He leaned in, studying Jason as though he might read every secret of his heart. "Child, what have you seen?" 9. Find a specific person. I have witnessed the death of parents. Ollivander's pale eyes lost the last trace of curiosity and sharpened into something like gravity. He slid the purplish-black wand into a plain, dark velvet bag, tied it with a silver cord, and handed it over solemnly. 7 galleons. Jason paid, his fingertips brushing the old man's dry, cool skin. "Child," Ollivander said, leaning in before he finally let go, "this wand has seen the end, and it still hungers for the end. Remember, the more powerful a tool, the stronger its appetite. Do not let it consume you." He melted back into the shadows of the shop and was gone. Stepping out into the bustling sunlight of Diagon Alley, the chill from the wand in Jason's pocket did not lessen. Professor McGonagall's face, however, had eased no further. She stopped dead, and the warm, teacherly patience she reserved for ordinary first years vanished. "Mr. Lester, have you ever had any contact with magic before today?" "No, Professor. Today was my first real glimpse of the wizarding world," Jason answered honestly. "Then how do you explain what just happened in there?" she pressed. "All the wands showed an affinity for you. That only appears in the oldest legends, usually around wizards who usher in new eras, and you're only 11. "Perhaps I was just lucky," Jason said, downplaying it. McGonagall's mouth thinned. Ollivander never believed in luck. nor do I. Your mental fortitude, your thirst for knowledge, and that resonance you just had, they're far beyond ordinary. I must report this to Headmaster Dumbledore immediately." Her words hurried, revealing the stir the incident had caused. She wasn't angry. She was unsettled and felt the duty to inform someone who could account for an unknown power. Making up her mind, she said, "Wait for me at Madame Malkin's. I'll be back in an hour. And whatever you do not go near Nocturne Alley. It's full of fallen wizards and forbidden dark arts. Curious students go missing there every year. It's not a place for you." Her wand tip indicated the dark, narrow entrance, and her tone hardened. Then she hurried away, as if eager to escape the mystery. Jason watched her vanish into the crowd and allowed himself a faint smile. He strolled along the cobbles alone, the cold in his pocket subtly reshaping his perception of this bright, busy world. Laughter around him took on a thin surface sheen. The magical objects in the windows glowed while concealing small shadows of rot. The Thestral wand, in its peculiar way, was showing him that everything had an end. His purpose was plain, to verify a single, world-defining thing. Soon his mark appeared. Outside Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, a thin boy with round glasses shared an ice cream almost as large as his face with an unusually tall, burly man. Harry Potter. Jason's gaze slid past the grinning giant to the lightning-shaped scar on the boy's forehead. Even from several meters away, it felt like a wound on the air, a nest, coiled with foul, resentful energy. Above Harry's otherwise clear soul aura, a malignant growth hung, sucking at life and magic. The wand in his pocket gave a faint, almost disgusted tremor. A fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul, weak, filthy, a lingering scrap. Jason steadied his breath, calmed the arcane within, and walked over with an easy step. "Hello, are you going to Hogwarts?" Harry looked up, his green eyes bright with a shy curiosity. "Hello, I'm Harry, Harry Potter." He introduced himself with the awkward politeness of a child. "Jason Lester, I just bought my wand. How about you?" Jason gave his name, and his gaze remained fixed on the scar. "Oh, that's brilliant. Another first year." Hagrid boomed, clapping Harry on the shoulder so hard the boy staggered. "Harry's starting this year too. We just came from Gringotts." "Nice to meet you." Jason smiled and extended his hand. Harry set down his ice cream and offered his small cream-smudged hand in return. The moment their skin touched, Jason sent a pinprick of compressed arcane energy, imperceptible to anyone else, probing the dark aura around the scar. Buzz. The scar reacted like a struck thing. A cold, tyrannical mental force shot out, crashing into Jason's probe with murderous malice. A silent shriek echoed on the mental plane, hatred of the living. Jason's mental barrier held easily, and he felt through the impact. Chaos, incompleteness, animal fear. Harry yelped and jerked his hand back as if stung, his face blanching. He clutched his forehead, trembling. "What's wrong, Harry?" Hagrid bent over him, shadowing the boy with his bulk. "Nothing. It's just my scar. Suddenly it hurt, like it was burning." Harry looked at Jason with confusion and a little fear, baffled that shaking hands could cause such pain. Jason withdrew his hand with an expression that showed no concern, as if none of it involved him. His objective had already been met. He had confirmed the Horcrux and tested both its defensive reflexes and the level of mental contamination. The fragment was weak, utterly without intelligence, more beast than soul. "Maybe all the magical energies in Diagon Alley are a bit much," Jason offered casually. "I felt a little strange when I first arrived, too." Hagrid scratched his beard and accepted the answer with a sympathetic grunt. "Maybe so. Poor lad. I've got a few more things to buy. See you at school." Jason nodded and turned away. "Goodbye, Jason." Harry waved despite the lingering ache in his forehead. Jason pushed through the crowd and slipped into a secluded corner. He closed his eyes and cleansed the cold trace he'd taken with arcane energy, restoring the clarity inside him. The so-called Chosen One was only a vessel tainted by a scrap of soul. The Dark Lord's remnant was fragile. The great powers of this world left him, for the moment, a little disappointed. 10. Wand bonus. The encounter with the so-called Son of Destiny meant nothing to Jason. It merely confirmed a conclusion he'd already reached, and nothing more. He turned away without a trace of nostalgia and melted into the crowded lanes of Diagon Alley, heading for a dim, second-hand magic shop with a weathered wooden sign above its door, Borgin and Burke's. The door groaned on its hinges when he pushed it open. The air inside was thick with dust, mildew, and the odd, layered sense of decaying magical ingredients. A gaunt shopkeeper glanced up from behind the counter, gave him a board once over, then bent his head to polish a rust-streaked cauldron. Jason's eyes swept the shelves of what ordinary wizards would call junk. On his retina, the Arcane Codex interface had already flickered open and refreshed silently. Fragments of a goblin-forged silver dagger, still retaining faint anti-magic properties. Charred mandrake roots with residual petrification effects, but too impure to be useful alone. A small bag of tooth powder from an unknown beast, basic hardening effects, usable in alchemical adhesives. What local witches and wizards dismissed as waste were the most basic, economical components to an arcanist. He sifted through them with the casual fascination of a student in a curiosity shop. "I'll take these," he said, pointing to a pinch of dull moonstone powder and a handful of crystal fragments whose shimmer was long gone. The shopkeeper raised an eyelid, a patronizing curl at the corner of his mouth. "Kid, that's rubbish. The moonstone's lost its magic ages ago. Those crystals won't even power a proper Lumos." "I just think they look unique," Jason answered with an age-appropriate, perfectly timed, innocent smile. The man snorted, too lazy to argue, swept the items into a paper bag, and named a price that was practically a giveaway. Jason paid and slipped the bag, along with the potion ingredients he'd bought earlier, into his canvas pack. To the shopkeeper, he was just a foolish kid squandering pocket money. Jason knew better. These unwanted scraps might be the first cornerstones of something much greater. He waited outside Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions to meet Professor McGonagall. She arrived exactly on time, her features still tight, lips pressed in a line, the surprise from Ollivander's shop still flickering behind her eyes. She took the cloth bag Jason offered without fanfare, nodded once, and dropped it into a seemingly ordinary handbag that gleamed faintly with hidden enchantments. From the leaky cauldron's fireplace back to the orphanage, they rode in silence. McGonagall's quiet was a complex statement, scrutiny, bewilderment, a thread of sober gravity she might not even have acknowledged. Jason noticed all of it. His reputation as a prodigy was set. The level of surveillance would only rise. Later, back in his Spartan room at the orphanage, Jason locked the door and drew the purple heart wand he'd chosen from its simple velvet pouch. A cold, profound sensation spread from his palm. It wasn't the ordinary temperature of wood. It was the presence of thestral core magic, final, impartial, a quiet contemplation of death. When that aura touched the pure, rational arcane energy coiled in Jason, there was no clash, only a seamless melding, as if both forces had always been facets of the same principle. Arcane energy was order. Death was the ultimate order of all things. He fed his purified arcane into the wand. The energy flowed like breath, converging at the tip. He could feel the thestral tail hair inside, its vibrations like those of a precisely tuned instrument, eager to demonstrate its function. His gaze dropped to the plain stone floor in the center of the room. It was time to expand the underground space. He summoned a basic shaping construct from the Arcane Codex, his mind stirring without sound. Fossil to mud. Arcane energy streamed through the wand into the stone. The floor softened as if a warm blade passed through butter. No leakage, no waste. The slabs visibly surrendered, turning into malleable mud. Energy consumption was about 30% less than he'd estimated. Control was precise down to the millimeter. This was only the beginning. Jason flicked his wrist and extended his mental power, issuing more sophisticated instructions to the mud. It writhed under invisible guidance. A portion lifted and slid aside, another formed into descending steps. The whole operation was silent and efficient. Then, with the tip of his wand, he drew a simple arc. Mud to stone. The shaped mud snapped back into firm rock, smooth across its surface and fitting with seamless joints. He tapped a newly formed step with his toe. It was harder than the original floor. This was the tool's real purpose. Not crude spellcasting, but efficient construction. He opened the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, and flicked through the long incantations and elaborate gestures. To him, it read like a child's doodles. Still, he needed to test the wand's effect on the world's native magic. Wingardium Leviosa. The quill on his bedside table floated up obediently. Jason narrowed his eyes and wove his mental power into countless invisible threads that wrapped the pen. The quill didn't merely hover, it traced after images in midair, performed sudden stops, high-speed rotations, delicate stalls, complex maneuvers with surgical precision. It was precise object manipulation, not the crude floating taught in lessons. Alohomora. He pointed at an old chest riddled with spring locks. A whisper of finely tuned magic slipped through the lid, mapping every spring and latch. Click, clack, click, clack. The chest opened with a series of near-silent clicks. He had spoken the spell, but what happened was the work of a master craftsman, a deliberate, careful unlocking that probed and released mechanisms rather than forcing them. The wand's output was stable, efficient, more potent than textbooks suggested, and used less energy. Finally, he lifted his wand. Lumos. A concentrated sphere of light formed at the tip. It was brighter than the standard lumos and beautifully steady, revealing every corner of the room without harshness. Energy efficiency had improved by at least 20%, but Jason frowned. Too diffuse, wasteful, he muttered. In his framework, every unit of energy should be used to the fullest. A sphere that evenly lit the entire room was an elegant, primitive design. His mind raced, and the Arcane Codex obliged. He mentally disassembled Lumos's energy model, analyzed it, and began reconstructing it with his own theory. He retained the luminous core, but grafted two runic structures from arcane engineering around it: energy convergence and focal compression. The light at the wand's tip responded. It collapsed inward, sharpening, its hue shifting from soft white to a hard, pale blue. A low hum filled the room. The glow condensed into a pinpoint bright enough to hurt if you looked directly at it. Jason opened his eyes. Cool, calculating light reflected in his pupils. He aimed at a discarded wooden stool in the corner. With a thought, the pinpoint detonated into a hair-thin blue beam that flashed and vanished. The stool's leg had a perfectly smooth, deep hole scorched black at the edges by intense heat, a clean bore that penetrated right through. Jason stepped forward, touched the cut with a finger, and the leg snapped off silently. He retracted his wand and examined the clean incision, a motion calm and unreadable. The world's standard spells were improvable. With a few deliberate modifications, they could be turned into precise, convenient tools. He thought of lazy kitchen magic and grinned faintly. Practicality, efficiency, a small godsend. 11. Promoted to Tier 1 Arcanist. Deep night cloaked the orphanage's simple room. Jason sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor, the dark purple sandalwood wand resting across his knees. His breathing was slow and steady, barely a sound in the hush. Since returning from Diagon Alley, he had seized every spare moment to meditate. The magic inside him, born from the depths of his soul, had grown purer and stronger under the spirit-guiding meditation. He could feel himself approaching a critical threshold, a thin but incredibly tough, invisible barrier. Break through it, and he would advance from apprentice to a true first-order arcanist. He thought it should be a natural breakthrough. With an initial mental strength of 18 points and 3 extraordinary talents, he had expected the process to be straightforward. He closed his eyes, and a surge of mental energy flowed out, guiding the long-accumulated magic within him. The force converged and struck the barrier. Once, twice. The barrier trembled, and fine cracks spidered across its surface. Now, this was the moment. Jason gathered everything and launched the third, fiercest assault. There was no triumphant shattering, no sublime ascension. Instead, a wildly violent energy burst out from behind the barrier with a ferocity far beyond anything he had imagined. It was vast and hard to control, hot, chaotic, and raw, like a living instinct. It slammed into his fragile meridians, tearing and burning them. Tiny beads of blood welled on his skin and vaporized in the heat. His bones creaked under strain as if they might snap. It was out of control. He understood instantly. The magic elements of this world were not the neatly calculable arcane energy he had known. They were more primitive, more chaotic, a wild force with its own will. His previous meditations had only been a way to comb through an untamed power. This promotion had enraged it. Pain rolled over him, threatening to swallow his consciousness. But his mental strength, 18 points, proved its worth. It kept a thread of clarity alive through the onslaught. Give up? Let this power tear him apart and consume his soul? No. Jason's mind descended deeper into a state of absolute rationality. He pushed his talents, memory palace, and exceptional comprehension to their limits, and the arcane codex within him flicked through vast banks of knowledge, searching, reorganizing. Conventional guidance had failed. Against this level of energy, redirection alone would not work. He had to build a core, strong and stable enough to impose absolute order, to suppress and tame the force, to transform it into his own. The core rune of a first-order arcanist, Jason made the riskiest but only correct choice. He reshaped his mental strength, what he expected to reach as 40 points after advancement, into an indestructible, exquisitely precise will-engraving blade. He stopped trying to soothe the violent magic. He would use it as the chisel to cut a rune into the deepest part of his turbulent mental sea. The process was razor-thin dangerous. One slip could mean eternal ruin. The first stroke, an arc of constraint and domain. As the blade descended, the energy recoiled, launching an even fiercer assault. A dry pop echoed, and a charred fissure split the wooden floor beneath him, centered where he sat. The second stroke, a straight line of filtration and purification. Sweetness pooled on his tongue. A trickle of hot blood ran from the corner of his mouth and hissed onto the floor. Each stroke was not mere construction, but a duel between will and wild instinct. He felt the power's anger, its refusal, its urge to destroy. Wizards, he thought, only knew how to passively accept magic's gifts. They feared losing control, so they padded their practice with incantations and rituals to beg for stability. Arcanists did not pray. Arcanists mastered power. His will-engraving blade traced precise, complex paths through his mind. Rune structures stamped into place, forming an increasingly intricate and stable three-dimensional array. He closed his eyes and let out a silent roar from the core of his being. Condense! The final stroke, the central point of core and transformation, landed exactly, binding and sealing the separate rune structures. A solemn hum rose not from the room, but from the deepest part of his soul, as if a new order had been born. The core rune, forged from pure will and arcane knowledge, flared with bright light. The raging magic inside him hit its absolute counter. It was immediately subdued, consumed, compressed, filtered, and refined by the rune. Then it was released anew. This energy was different now. It was no longer wild and scalding, but rational, cool at the edges. It mended torn meridians and nourished his exhausted body. Jason opened his eyes. The room was wrecked, the floor scored with charred cracks, the air heavy with blood and smoke. He spread his right palm, and a perfectly clear drop of water condensed out of thin air, hovering above his hand. He could see every detail, its surface tension, its inner structure, the energy braided through it. Without chanting, he willed the drop to change form. With a faint whoosh, the droplet froze, not into ordinary ice, but into a compressed, razor-sharp crystal that gleamed with a pale blue chill. It cut the air and vanished. On the opposite wall, a small, smooth-edged, bottomless black hole yawned where the crystal had struck. A smile finally tugged at Jason's lips. This was how power should feel. He summoned the Arcane Codex panel and checked the rewards of his advancement. Name, Jason Lester, soulbound. Race, human, mixed blood. Age, 11. Class 1. Mental strength, physique, 15. Magic power, 400. Talents, memory palace, soul talent. Dexterous mind, soul talent. Exceptional comprehension, soul talent. First order runes, comprehensive, 3100. First order formations, comprehensive. First order meditation, Grand Sun Codex. First order puppetry, comprehensive. First order alchemy introduction. First order potionology introduction. First order spells, ice cone spell, earth spike technique, mage hand, arcane missiles, fireball spell. 12. A genius driven crazy by poverty, from building miracles to setting up a stall to start a business. Jason opened his eyes. Everything in the room had changed. The dust motes that once drifted at random now traced precise, measurable paths. Their trajectories, speeds, even rotational attitudes registered in his perception as quantifiable parameters. He could hear the steady rhythm of his heart, the faint creak of the wooden floor cooling in the night. Power, he realized, began with insight into the world's fundamental rules. The Arcane Codex unfolded in his spiritual sea like a thick, ancient tome ringed with countless golden runes. Pages turned on their own, and an immense stream of data poured out. Tier advancement had brought a deluge of knowledge, and his memory palace talent archived, analyzed, and integrated it instantly. Dozens of Tier 1 runes, formations, alchemical recipes, and evocation spell templates became his, not learned anew, but like memories unlocked and made accessible. Choosing a Tier 1 core meditation would determine his path. Dozens of standard meditations flashed through his mind. Starry night contemplation. Contemplate the endless stars to discern the universe's mysteries. He simulated it and saw himself become a calm observer, logging stellar trajectories in lonely, slow silence. 2. Passive. An arcanist was a maker of rules, not a librarian. He crossed it out. Tidal meditation. Tap the planet's magnetic field so magic flows vast and inexhaustible. Too limited. A planet's field has bounds. Depending on an external source was second-rate. He wanted power that arose from within, from the universe's most fundamental essence. Jason weighed pros, cons, and potentials until a name stood out: Grand Sun Codex. The Codex's description was spare and irresistible. Contemplate the most ancient, most incandescent eternal star at the universe's dawn. Draw its essence, capable of incinerating all things, yet also birthing everything, to gradually refine one's arcane power into sun-true fire, a force of ultimate destruction and boundless creation. Later chapters could carry a practitioner smoothly all the way to the legendary Tier 6 Arcanist. More than practical promise, the imagery, burning away obstacles, illuminating ages, stirred something deep in him. He chose it. Following the Grand Sun Codex's opening guidance, Jason adjusted his breathing, focused his mind, and began his first formal meditation. The instant he committed to the contemplation, his spiritual sea was no longer silent darkness. It became a chaotic void. Out of nowhere, an infinitesimal speck of light exploded into being, an infant sun burning with billions of years of condensed energy. Light and heat surged at him, almost vaporizing his consciousness. At that moment, the Tier 1 arcane rune in his spiritual sea, an emblem of order and restraint, flared. It stood like a dam against the torrent, stripping and refining a faint but unbearably pure seam of scorching energy from the onrush. That energy dyed his core rune a bright, pure gold. Converted through the rune, the nascent power poured into him as warmth, displacing the colder arcane energy he had worked with before. The sun-true fire flowed through his body, tempering and strengthening him, slow but steady. After his body adapted, his consciousness sank deeper into the Codex. He saw the floating city, not a city in the ordinary sense, but a mobile domain, an absolutely secure laboratory where elements and energies were so abundant, meditation could accelerate. Towers pierced cloudscapes, golems labored in alchemical workshops, giant magic shields warded against disaster. It was the fundamental artifact of an arcanist civilization. He exhaled a puff of warm air, forcibly tamping down the urge to build. A complete floating city would demand astronomical resources, impractical now. But a floating base, a minimal platform, might be feasible. From his storage pouch, he produced treated parchment, spread it on the floor, picked up a quill, dipped it in ink, and began to draw. His pen traced intricate diagrams, anti-gravity rune arrays, energy circuits, basic physical barriers, magic pressurization nodes. Arcane knowledge flowed into concrete blueprints under his hand. The main material would be a specially treated granite, altered by alchemical processes. The array recorded in the Codex could convert ordinary granite with a handful of common metals, but operating it required extremely precise control of spiritual and magical power. More importantly, the metals and catalysts for the conversion and the magic crystals needed to drive the array all cost money. A lot of money. His preliminary estimate for the special granite alone would be enough to bankrupt a pure-blood noble house like the Malfoys. His modest inheritance wouldn't even make a ripple in a Gringotts vault. He slammed the quill down. The nib struck the parchment with a sharp snap. A drop of black ink spread and ruined a complex node formed of hundreds of tiny runes. Money. A problem he had not seriously considered since his transmigration now sat like a weight atop his grand, ridiculous blueprint. Selling illicit goods in Nocturne Alley? Too risky, profits unstable, and exposure likely. Going on treasure hunts like in certain stories? That was Harry Potter's path, a one-off windfall, not the steady, vast income he needed. His eyes drifted from the ruined floating city sketch to the draft beside it, where he had outlined the Grand Sun Codex's meditation steps. Then a wild but practical idea snapped into place. This world was full of wizards who hungered for power but lacked the correct path. He possessed the most accurate key. He could sell imitations of that key, release a public, free version with its core parts neutered, and a hidden backdoor would be enough to kick up a storm across the magical world. Once people grew used to this efficient meditation, he could sell advanced versions, complete editions, and customized protocols for different elemental affinities, a continual stream of revenue. It wasn't just about money. By making the path to power a commodity, he could found a new power system centered on him, use it to gather resources, and climb to the top. He discarded the ruined pen, smoothed a fresh sheet of parchment, and steadier than he had been in a long time, wrote the title, stroke by stroke across the top, Spirit Guiding Meditation, Introductory Chapter. 13. The First Step to Conquer Hermione. Use the knowledge she can't refuse. September 1st, King's Cross Station, London. The crush of people and the shrill whistle of the arriving train blended into a steady roar that filled the entire concourse. Jason pushed his luggage trolley through the crowd, glancing up at the platform signs, barely noticing the tired, ordinary travelers and clinging families around him. His steps slowed between platforms 9 and 10. There she was. A young witch with a head of thick, curly hair clutched a battered copy of Hogwarts: A History and paced anxiously in front of the brick wall between the platforms. She kept glancing back toward the entrance, then scrutinizing the wall as if it might reveal some hidden seam. Confusion and helplessness stamped her face. Hermione Granger, the first cornerstone of his plan. Jason adjusted the direction of his trolley and stopped a few paces behind her, slipping into the shadow of a support pillar. He waited quietly for the moment. The girl took a deep breath as if she'd made up her mind. She pushed her cart forward, closed her eyes, and jogged toward the wall. Less than a meter away, she froze, eyes flying open, her face a mix of fear and irritation at the thought of walking into brick. She bit her lip and kicked her suitcase in frustration. That was her third abortive attempt. Afraid of a bit of pain? The voice came steady from behind. Hermione jumped and turned. A tall boy about her age looked at her calmly, no sneer, only genuine curiosity. I just wasn't sure, she admitted, her cheeks flushing. She straightened instinctively, trying to hide her embarrassment. Professor McGonagall said to walk straight through, but my parents are dentists, and they'd say that walking into brick at 10 kilometers an hour would, at best, give you a broken nose and a concussion. Jason finished for her. He stepped forward and tapped the wall lightly with his fingertips. The sound was dull and stony. But this isn't a physics lab, he said, withdrawing his hand and making a vague gesture in the air. Don't worry, this place is cast with a kind of space-folding magic. Think of this side and the other side as aligned in a different dimension. You're not hitting a wall, you're passing through a folded bit of space. Hermione blinked. The clear explanation seemed to sweep away some of her fear, but her careful, scholarly nature took over immediately. Space folding? I've never seen that term in any textbook, she said suspiciously. How do you know so much? Because I'm interested in magic theory, Jason replied casually. Most wizards are content to know how to use spells, but I want to know why they work. This wall is essentially a spatial short circuit, a simplified fixed vanishing cabinet. Books describe the phenomenon, but they rarely explain the principle. Spatial short circuit, Hermione muttered, and her eyes brightened with a light Jason had seen only on students who'd just made a connection. It's wonderful. It's like opening a whole new door. Curiosity, once lit, could not be smothered. So, shall we go through together? He held out his hand. I'm Jason Lester. Hermione Granger, pleased to meet you. Her shake was eager, the embarrassment gone. Jason led the way with his trolley. Hermione followed close behind. Passing through the wall felt strange, like stepping into a warm pool. The noise cut off suddenly, leaving a breathless, weightless second. Then the scene opened up. The Scarlet Hogwarts Express idled at the platform, its engine breathing thick white steam and letting out a rhythmic hiss. The air smelled of coal and oil and something else, an indefinable, fresh scent of magic. the hooting of owls and parents' want. Shouts wove into a unique, bustling symphony. "Oh my goodness," Hermione breathed, taking it in as if she were seeing it for the first time. Jason helped her lift her suitcase onto the train, and they threaded down the narrow corridor, searching for an empty compartment. They passed a carriage full of red-haired children and a witch pushing a snack trolley before finding a vacant compartment toward the middle rear of the train. Once they were settled, Hermione sat across from him, practically vibrating with questions. "Do you have more of those theories you mentioned? About how magic actually works?" "Of course." Jason looked out at the platform shrinking behind them, then offered the bait he had been saving. "Theory is only the foundation. Lately, I've been working on something more practical." He held up his right hand, palm open. A perfect crystalline droplet of water condensed out of the air and hovered, motionless, above his palm. "This is the level most wizards reach with a nonverbal spell, shaping elements and making them hold form." Hermione watched, eyes narrowing with the focus of someone cataloging every detail. It matched the advanced techniques she'd read about. But what if you think about it differently? Before he finished, a faint light bloomed inside the droplet. It flared, growing dazzlingly bright, the little globe radiating heat and light while remaining perfectly stable, not evaporating or breaking. Hermione's eyes widened. She could feel the energy packed into that tiny bead of water, far greater than its size implied. She began. "This is what I call magic quality." Jason's gaze shifted from the droplet to her awestruck face. "We don't just use magic to change shape, we change its essence. Like water, a muddy puddle and a glass of pure spring water can do different things. Higher quality magic makes spells more stable, more powerful, and more efficient." With a slight thought, the glowing droplet froze into a sharply faceted crystal of ice, then blazed into a silent white flame a second later, and finally settled back into clear water. The transitions were seamless. Hermione leaned forward, breath quickening, her eyes shining with the kind of hunger for knowledge that had put her at the top of her class. This was beyond anything in her textbooks, a whole side of magic she'd never known existed. Can I join this research?" she asked, too loud with excitement to keep it quiet. Jason let the droplet vanish into a mist and watched the anticipation in her face. "What I need isn't a student so much as a partner. Someone who loves finding the truth and isn't afraid to challenge existing rules," he said. "Knowledge is better shared, but the path of discovery is a lonely one unless you choose your companions carefully." Hermione nodded so vigorously her curls bounced. Determination shone in her eyes. "I completely agree." Jason allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. "Then welcome aboard." The Hogwarts Express pulled away from the platform and the city blurred into the distance. Inside the compartment, Hermione leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. "So the essence of a spell is really forcing the arrangement and combination of elemental particles?" "A good place to start," Jason said. He lifted a fingertip and a clear drop of water formed from the air, condensing into a perfect hexagonal ice crystal that glinted with cold. "Think deeper. What's issuing the command for that arrangement? What determines how stable and precise it is?" Hermione's lips parted. She bit her lower lip, thinking, "Is it the wand or our will?" Will, mental power, more precisely. The ice crystal on Jason's fingertip melted soundlessly and reshaped into a tiny bright flame that flickered without heat. Wands are amplifiers, spells are shortcuts, but the root is always the caster. The stronger and more focused your mind, the closer your control becomes to absolute. The flame faded, turning back into a perfectly round drop of water that hovered on his fingertip. Hermione watched, rapt. This was far beyond anything in the textbooks. A gentle knock sounded at the compartment door. A round-faced boy poked his head in, anxious. "Excuse me, sorry to bother you. Have you seen a toad? Trevor's missing. I've looked everywhere." Hermione shook her head sympathetically. Jason studied the boy for a moment. Neville Longbottom, he thought. There was untapped power in him. He leaned back and, without getting up, casually raised his hand toward the corridor. "Accio." A single clear word, and a nearly imperceptible ripple of magic pushed through the carriage. A few seconds later, a plump toad flew out of nowhere, arcing precisely overheads and landing in Jason's outstretched palm. Neville's jaw dropped. He stared, speechless. Just a basic skill, Jason said, handing over the dazed toad. Put a tracking charm on him. It makes things much easier. I haven't learned that yet. Thank you. Really, thank you so much. Neville clutched Trevor like he'd found a lost treasure. As Neville turned to go, a trolley clattered down the corridor. Anything off the trolley, dears? Chocolate frogs, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, called a witch pushing snacks. Oh, I want some, came a voice from the far end of the carriage. A freckled redhead tugged a thin, black-haired boy and barreled over, nearly bumping Neville. Hi, are there any spare seats? The black-haired boy's eyes swept the compartment, paused on Jason, then sharpened in recognition. It's you. I saw you in Diagon Alley. Heard the wand seller say you bought that special wand. Jason smiled and nodded. Jason Lester, he said. Harry Potter, come in. Harry and Ron squeezed into the compartment. Ron immediately reached for the trolley, jingled a handful of sickles, and bought a mound of sweets. After quick introductions, Ron tore open a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and mumbled, "Which house do you think we'll be sorted into? All my family's in Gryffindor. I really hope I don't get Slytherin." The sorting hat finds your core traits, Jason said. Courage, wisdom, loyalty, ambition. It respects your choice, but you have to have the seed of the trait inside you first. Hermione sat bolt upright and produced quill and parchment. Harry listened thoughtfully, while Ron worried over whether his chocolate frog card would show Dumbledore. The conversation was cut off by the compartment door being pushed open. A pale, blond boy swaggered in with two burly companions and blocked the doorway, smirking. They said Harry Potter was in here. It's true, he drawled as his gaze flicked around the carriage. Draco Malfoy. He ignored everyone else and held out a well-manicured hand to Harry. I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. Ron snorted loudly. Malfoy's face went dark. Is something on my face, Weasley? Oh, right, red hair, freckles, and that huge brood your family can't afford. Ron went crimson, knuckles white, ready to spring, but Harry held him back. Malfoy shot a look of contempt at Harry, then turned his smile toward him and offered advice. Potter, you'll learn some wizarding families are naturally superior. Don't drag your name down with the wrong sort. I can tell you who to avoid. Harry glared at the outstretched hand and then at Ron, still trembling. I think I can tell the wrong sort for myself, he said quietly, but firm. Malfoy's lip curled. His eyes slid over the thick copy of Hogwarts, a history on Hermione's lap. He sneered. I'd advise you to be careful, Potter. Hang about with poor Weasleys and filthy mudbloods, and you'll end up like your parents. The compartment went instantly cold. Hermione's face registered confusion. She didn't know what the word meant, then shock. Ron's restraint broke. He lunged, yelling, but he was a beat too slow. Jason only raised his eyelids, glanced at Malfoy, and with the casualness of someone stretching, lifted his wand. No obvious surge of magic. Nothing dramatic rippled through the air. Still, Malfoy and his two cronies froze mid-movement, expressions locked between shock and incomprehension. Their bodies went rigid and toppled backward. Thump! 3 dull impacts on the wooden floor echoed through the suddenly silent carriage. Harry watched, mouth half open. Ron halted mid-lunge, eyes wide as the 3 boys lay motionless. Hermione pointed at them, whispering, "Is that Petrificus totalis?" "Some people just need to be taught a lesson in respect," Jason said, lowering his wand as if he'd only done something trivial. He rubbed his temples quickly and discreetly. Urgent footsteps sounded outside. The compartment door burst open and Percy Weasley, prefect, pushed in. His face drained when he saw the 3 boys on the floor. Merlin's beard. What on earth happened here? Who did this? Just a quick reminder about manners. Jason's voice was flat. Percy stiffened. Mr. Malfoy's words were inappropriate. I gave him a moment to think about the consequences. He flicked his wand and hastily broke whatever spell had pinned the 3 of them. Malfoy staggered to his feet and almost tumbled out of the compartment. His face was pale and his hands trembled, but he still tried to bluster, pointing at Jason. How dare you ambush me? You just wait. My father will make you pay." Jason tipped his head, a faint sneer on his lips. "I look forward to it, but next time, have your father teach you what you can say and what will get you killed." Under that steady, cold look, Malfoy's mouth closed. He shot Jason a resentful glare under Percy's sharp prompting, then fled the compartment with his tail between his legs. Percy frowned. Duels are forbidden on school grounds. Don't let it happen again." The compartment door shut. Percy's reprimand faded. Ron let out a long, awed breath. Wow, that was brilliant. Jason ignored the praise and turned to Hermione, picking up the conversation as if nothing had happened. That was a display of magical quality, precise, efficient, nothing wasted on flashy light or sound. He spoke about the incident with an academic calm that made it sound like analysis rather than spectacle. Hermione stared at him, eyes bright with admiration and curiosity. "You didn't even move your lips just then," she whispered. "The books say that's true silent magic. Only the most advanced wizards can do it." Night fell as the boats reached shore. Jason stepped onto the slick cobblestones, and while the first years gaped at the castle for the first time, his gaze passed over their wonder and fixed on the building itself. In his mind, Hogwarts wasn't just stone and mortar. It was running, an enormous, precise network of magic. Ancient runes woven into every wall, a creation that had been functioning for 1,000 years. Behind the oak doors, Professor Minerva McGonagall waited, austere. She led the first years through the entrance hall into a small, empty chamber. "The sorting ceremony is a crucial Hogwarts tradition," she said, clear and authoritative. McGonagall's voice carried weight. Her transfiguration mind was disciplined and exact, possibly the perfect academic guarantor for Jason's meditation ideas, he thought briefly. In the great hall, an enchanted ceiling showed a glittering sky. Thousands of floating candles cast warm light. Jason's eyes swept the staff table. Dumbledore sat in the central golden chair, his smile benign, his eyes hinting at depths no one could measure. Snape's face was as sullen as always, his black eyes sharp and appraising. Jason's gaze lingered on Professor Quirrell, the purple turban looking ridiculous against the thin, sycophantic man. An ancient, decayed darkness clung to him in a way that didn't match the weak magic he otherwise gave off. After the Sorting Hat's ancient song, Professor McGonagall began to read names. Malfoy, Draco. Draco swept forward with a smug air. The battered hat barely touched his hair before it cried, "Slytherin!" The Slytherin table erupted in applause. Malfoy strutted to his place and deliberately shot a provocative look at Jason. Jason returned the stare without expression. The pressure of that gaze, polished, superior, faltered under it, and Malfoy's smile froze. "Potter, Harry," McGonagall called next. A general murmur swept the hall. Snape's eyes darkened with something unreadable, a twist of hatred and the ghost of nostalgia. Dumbledore watched intently as the hat decided. "Gryffindor," it declared, and cheering broke out. "Lester Jason," McGonagall announced. Jason stepped forward. Under the curious, scanning eyes of the whole hall, he put on the tattered hat. Instantly, an ancient consciousness probed his mind, strands of the founder's thoughts that had slept for centuries. It did not find a child's fluttering nerves or hopeful dreams. It met a mind built of pure reason and logic. In Jason's private mental space, countless arcane runes guarding a core flared to life in cold, efficient light. The Sorting Hat's magic was swept up and translated into streams of data it could not parse. Warning, external mental probe detected. Protocol legitimate lesser. Initiating reverse analysis. Analyzing. Target composition. Enchanted item, soul fragments, 4 highly fused. Existence time, 17 years. Stars reversed, elements broke into basic particles, a luminous city floated weightlessly, and a grimoire woven from light and data opened before him. The hat's voice on his head twisted into panic. "No, what is this? Ah!" The hat convulsed. Its voice in the hall grew thin and frantic, mumbled in a way no one there had ever heard from it before. "City in the sky, flowing runes. No, this isn't magic. This is a grimoire. Logic. Error! Error! Cannot categorize." Silence slammed into the great hall. Everyone froze at the absurd, terrified babble of the Sorting Hat. Snape sat bolt upright, staring at Jason with a new intensity, face drawn. For the first time, the smile left Dumbledore's face. Shocked, he sent a delicate, probing charm toward Jason, and it vanished at once without response. From beneath Quirrell's purple turban, a pair of crimson eyes opened like slits. "A variable," a voice breathed. Jason's thought cut across the clamor like a blade. "Shut up, or I'll take you apart." The command was sharp, absolute. In the hat's panic, a voice screamed, "Monster! You are a monster!" The Sorting Hat's terror bled into the hall. "A variable unseen for 1,000 years. Your ambition could swallow the Black Lake. Your wisdom shames Ravenclaw. Slytherin, Only Slytherin is your cradle. No, I want Gryffindor. Jason's resolve was iron. The hat sputtered incredulously. Why? Gryffindor is full of reckless, impulsive, brainless fools, it protested. Jason showed it a sliver of his design, an image, trivial within the immensity of his plans, but enough to silence the old thing. In the sunlight, shadows hide the deepest, he told it. The stage for heroes is where ambition will be seen. That is where I belong. For a long time the hat was mute, its ancient spirit cowed by a superior intelligence and a grander aim. At last, with the last of its energy, it announced into the stunned hall in a voice hoarse with disbelief. Gryffindor. Polite, hesitant applause followed, edged with bewilderment. Jason lifted the hat, placed it on the stool, and went to the Gryffindor table. He sat between Harry and Hermione as cheers mixed with confused looks. Hermione leaned close, whispering fiercely, Jason, what did it mean by city in the sky and grimoire? Jason picked up a silver goblet and watched the water inside, studying how the light bent through it. After a moment, he smiled and said, What do you think an old hat that only sings understands? 16. The Night Hunter and the Gatekeeper, Longing for Light. Late at night in the Gryffindor common room, the fire had burned down to a bed of dark red embers, occasionally sending a soft crackle through the silence. Jason slipped out from behind the fat lady's portrait without a sound. On his mental map, he marked the heavily worn magical rune node behind the portrait as usable. To him, Hogwarts was a living, cumbersome alchemical construct. The corridor air was cool, smelling of old stone and sealed enchantments. Flickering torchlight stretched his shadow long and short across the walls. A subtle concealment spell slid into place, and his presence thinned, folding into the darkness. His mental sense spread, tracing the flow of magic in every inch of space. He heard the ripples on the Baron's wake as the Bloody Baron drifted past, felt the mischief of Peeves as the poltergeist hid 3 fresh dung bombs in a suit of armor on the 4th floor, and registered the steady hum of ancient defensive wards deep inside the castle. He picked up a humanoid node patrolling a fixed route, a little pulse of magic so weak it was nearly extinguished, and a biological sensor linked to it. Argus Filch and his cat, Madame Norris. Perfect experimental subjects. Filch was reclusive and cut off from the mainstream magical world, his heart full of inferiority and a hunger for power. His success would be a persuasive advertisement. His failure wouldn't attract attention from important people. He was disposable, exactly the sort of recruit Jason wanted. For the plans Jason was building, he would need many such helpers to explore other worlds. Growth cost resources. As in the life he remembered, cultivating greatness required a supply. Without a force to gather those resources, he could never rise. For now, the prey had walked into his hunting ground. Jason moved with care, avoiding loose flagstones that might complain. He went straight to the tapestry on the 7th floor, the one showing troll-bashing Barnabas the Barmy, and paced once in front of the blank stretch of wall, repeating a single clear command in his mind. I need a chamber of secrets where I can have a friendly conversation with the Hogwarts administrator. He deliberately left out the critical caveat, uninterrupted. It was a baited command, designed to produce a door that should not be discovered. An ancient oak door materialized on the smooth wall, its brass handle glinting faintly. At the same moment, a sharp, warning mew cut through the corridor's silence from around the corner. Everything was proceeding as he'd planned. He turned in time to see 2 red eyes gleam in the dark. Madame Norris. Good, the target had appeared. Footsteps, hurried and dragging, came from the far end of the hallway, the sound of years of patrols mixed with a thin glimmer of excitement. A hoarse voice drew closer. Got you! I've got you! A little rule breaker out after hours. You won't get away this time. Filch spilled from the shadows, clutching an old oil lamp, his face a mask of glee. The oak door behind him winked out the instant he stepped forward, the walls smoothed as if nothing had happened. Jason fell back into plain sight and let the concealment slip away, bathing in the lamplight. Good evening, Mr. Filch. The triumphant smile froze on Filch's face. He had expected a terrified child, not a calm first year who didn't shriek or flee. All of Filch's practiced threats lost their bite. Anger surged, and he snatched at Jason's shoulder, his fingernails worrying the fabric of the robe. His voice was hoarse and cruel. A Gryffindor first year, Out after hours, breaking school rules. I'll have you scrubbing chamber pots for a week. Detention? Jason's eyes flicked past Filch to the lamp swinging slightly between them. His tone was flat. I thought you'd be more interested in the fact that I just conjured a door out of thin air. Filch stiffened. His hand tightened on Jason's shoulder as genuine fear flickered in his cloudy eyes. What nonsense are you talking about? There's nothing here. Don't think you can fool me with pretty words. Is that so? Jason's voice was calm, each word pressed against Filch's nerves. Tell me, Mr. Filch, if there were a place that could grant a person's deepest desire, what would you want most? For a moment, Filch's bravado surged back. He tried to hide the tremor in his breath by shouting, I'd like to hang you from the ceiling and give you a good whipping, you insolent brat, he barked, trying to drown out the unease beneath his words. Jason simply shook his head and stepped closer, closing the distance on purpose. The movement made Filch flinch. No, Jason said quietly. What you want is to light this lamp with your own magic, not those muggle matches. The words hit Filch like a blow. He staggered back as if struck. How could you possibly know, he croaked, losing the ferocity he'd tried to show. Fear, humiliation, and a frantic, shameful hope bled through his voice. For a moment, his face was a map of remembered failures, a childhood of never managing to make a feather float, the contempt of others, the quiet contempt of being a squib at Hogwarts, the nights spent wasting money on useless potions that promised what they could not deliver. Jason had touched the rawest, most secret wound. I can feel it, Jason said gently, keeping the pressure on. You can sense magic, its shape, the tug of it, but it's blocked. It doesn't flow for you. You want to touch it, to command it, but it won't obey. A defective product, trapped behind a glass. Filch's grip slackened almost completely. Jason stepped forward again, forcing Filch to meet his gaze. The corridor held its breath as the squib caretaker's defenses began to crumble. 17. Temptation from the devil. I can make you pick up the wand again. Shut up! A low growl rolled up from the depths of Filch's throat, the last scrap of dignity in his voice. He thrust the oil lamp forward at Jason's face, the heat of the flame stinging the boy's eyebrows. The motion seemed half a plea, to use this ordinary fire to drive off the presence standing before him, a presence that had seen every secret he had ever owned. Jason did not flinch. He stood perfectly still and extended his right hand. At his fingertip, a pinpoint of light appeared out of nowhere. It began almost invisible, then swelled until it became a little sphere of light no bigger than a pigeon's egg, radiating a warm, pure glow. Filch's pupils narrowed to pinpricks. This was not lumos, that required a wand and a spell. It was not the crude flame of an oil lamp, which needed fuel. It was something else entirely. Jason watched Filch's frozen face. The glow revealed every crease and notch, written by decades of humiliation. A bargain, Mr. Filch? He said. His voice pulled at Filch in a way that felt almost physical, burrowing into the tenderest places of his heart. I will grant you the power to kindle flame. In return, you will provide a small convenience for my nighttime activities in the castle. Filch's Adam's apple bobbed. He wanted to refuse, to bark and drag this insolent boy to Dumbledore's office. Instead, his throat closed. All his will hung on the tiny globe of light at Jason's fingertip. Jason's fingertip shifted. The sphere elongated into a silent streak and slipped like a meteor into the wick of Filch's lamp. Whoosh! The wick flared with a brilliant, almost blinding light. The corridor bathed in a warmth and clarity Filch had never seen. He stared at the lamp as if it had become something otherworldly. He could feel the sensation in the flame. Alive, familiar, something he had hungered for in the long, lonely nights. This is only the beginning, Jason murmured. The words were temptation made audible. Filch's breath came fast and shallow. The lamp shook in his hand. Shadows licked the cold stone walls, echoing his inner turmoil. Go on, he rasped. Pride and rules and shame all melted away. Only power remained. Wizards cast spells through magic, and the key to directing magic is mental strength, Jason said flatly, letting the statement settle. You've probably seen those mail-order courses, Magic Made Easy, Squib Edition, all that rubbish. They promise to awaken the dormant power. Nonsense. Filch flinched, as if struck. Shame flared hot in his eyes, deeper than the lamp's glow. But they aren't entirely wrong, Jason continued. the tone shifting like a fisherman tightening and then easing the line. Your magic isn't sleeping. It's always been there, diffused and formless because you haven't been taught how to shape it. Mental strength is the hand that can gather it. Hope surged so suddenly it washed the despair away. Filch's defenses, brittle from years of humiliation, crumbled. He grabbed Jason's robe sleeve with nails that dug into the fabric, the posture of a man clutching at a last hope. You teach me? Of course. Jason eased his sleeve free and smoothed the cloth as if the gesture were nothing. In exchange, you will turn a blind eye to my nocturnal activities. To protect both of us, the transfer of this knowledge must be formalized with a contract. A contract? Filch's old wariness rose. He had been burned before by promises that meant nothing. All knowledge has its price, Jason said plainly. You must swear never to teach this to anyone else and never to interfere with my night work. That is all. Filch's eyes darted with suspicion, longing, hatred, and fear. The thought of possessing magic, even enough to perform the tiniest spell, was an obsession that had never left him. If you deceive me, follow me. Filch needed no more words. He turned and led, his steps heavy, driven by a mix of anger and desperate hope. His office was cramped and dim. Shackles and unpleasant implements lined the walls. The air smelled of stone, dust, and a faintly fishy sweetness, the ghost of cat food. Jason went straight to the scarred wooden table. On it lay a battered book whose gilded title seemed almost a taunt. Magic Made Easy, Squib Edition. Filch lunged to reclaim it, clutching it to his chest like a relic. The book was his last shred of dignity. His hands shook as he hugged it tight. Jason picked up the book anyway and flipped 2 pages. The brittle paper whispered, "Magic Made Easy, such a nice name," he said without contempt, but with an edge sharper than any mocking laugh. "Don't touch it!" Filch snatched it back. His face reddened with an old shame. "What's your method?" he demanded, forcing himself into control. Jason calmly tore a page from his notebook, drew a quill from his pocket, and looked at Filch. "What do you want, Mr. Filch? To sense the scattered power inside you, or to actually wield it, even if only to light a wand or say the simplest incantation?" The question opened the deepest wound in Filch. His lips trembled. Only a low, strangled sound came out, a raw thing of pain and longing. Jason understood. He began to write on the parchment with deliberate strokes. The characters that formed were not ordinary English, but something older, runes and esoteric signs that gave the paper a feel of contract and right rather than instruction. Below, in common tongue, he added the practical terms. He pushed the parchment across the table. "This is a knowledge contract. Sign, and it will take effect. It contains the most basic practices for sensing and condensing mental power so you can detect and seize it. It will be enough for you to perform the simplest lumos." Filch seized the parchment like a man clutching a rope thrown into swift water. He read greedily, mouthing the words, trying to tattoo them into his memory. When he finished, a new doubt flickered across his face. "Is that all?" "This is my earnest offer, proof for you and investment for me," Jason replied with a merchant's coolness. "It will let you believe what I say and show me you're worth further effort. If it fails, the contract won't take effect and you lose nothing." He let the silence hang, giving Filch a final chance to back away. Then he told him the cost. "I need an observable example to validate my theory. You need a door to be opened. For guidance after this contract, each subsequent stage will cost 10 galleons. 10 galleons on top of this?" Filch blurted, more stunned than angered. He had fallen entirely into the boy's rhythm. He clutched the parchment, edges creased, gaze hungry. "You're experimenting on me." "I call it an investment," Jason said. "I invest in your desire. You return it with progress, or with galleons." He rose, making the end of the negotiation clear. Jason's hand touched the cold doorknob, then paused. Filch's voice, hoarse but steady, stopped him. "I'll sign," he said. "But why me?" Jason turned. For the first time, something like a smile touched his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because every great theory needs a fearless pioneer. And you, Mr. Filch." He let his look weigh the man before him. "Are the most desperate and the most destitute in this castle, aren't you?" He opened the door and stepped into the dark. The office held only Filch and the lamp that burned with an almost unnatural brightness. In the lamplight, Filch's hands trembled as they folded around the parchment. Temptation and hope pressed tight between his fingers. 18. Silent Spellcaster. The Transfiguration classroom smelled of old parchment and wood polish, and the air hummed with a mix of tension and excitement. New Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs clustered in the benches, whispering eagerly. "My dad says Professor McGonagall can turn herself into a cat, a real cat!" Ron breathed to Harry, his expression a comic blend of awe and alarm. Harry shifted, a little dizzy from the diagrams and wand work in his open textbook and from being woken too early by Jason that morning. Hermione, face nearly buried in her copy of Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, muttered, "The book says transfiguration requires absolute concentration. The caster has to suppress the object's inherent properties with their will." Her words were barely audible over the chatter. The classroom door swung open and the noise died instantly. Minerva McGonagall filled the doorway in a dark green robe, her posture rigid, lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing as she crossed to the podium, eyeing every student with a gaze so sharp they all sat up straighter. "Transfiguration is the most complex and dangerous magic taught at Hogwarts," she announced, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "It follows strict laws. Any attempt to flout those laws will bring severe consequences." Her look landed on a Hufflepuff who had been on the verge of laughing. The smile froze in place. "Anyone who disturbs my class will be permanently removed from it. I will not repeat myself." She raised her wand in a precise, economical motion. The match on the podium lengthened and thinned without a sound, shifting into a silver-glowing needle. It hovered for a beat, then with another swift flick reverted to a match and finally became an exquisite quill that settled beside the inkwell. The whole sequence was so smooth it showed no strain. The students inhaled as if witnessing raw power embodied. "Today's task is simple." Professor McGonagall handed a box of matches to each student, her knobby fingers tapping a desk. "Turn it into a needle." Immediately the room filled with a chaotic chorus of attempts. "Vera Verto! Feraverto!" Wrong intonations and clumsy wand work collided into a discordant racket. The tip of Harry's match grew a little sharper but remained wooden. He jabbed at it with his wand and got no further. Ron overdid his gestures so badly his match bent and puffed black smoke. He stared at Jason, mouthing for help. Seamus Finnegan, true to form, misjudged his control. His match popped and blew apart into a small pile of ash, filling the air with the smell of singed wood and earning low sniggers. Hermione, biting her lip, tried again and again. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her match transformed only into a strange, top-heavy stub, half metallic sheen, half wood, awkward and unfinished. Frustrated, she looked toward Jason and stopped cold. Jason had not mouthed a spell. He had barely moved. In the sea of loud chanting and flailing wands, his silence was conspicuous. He tapped the tip of his wand to the match with a barely perceptible motion, eyes half closed, concentration absolute. Around him, the class sounded distant, as if someone had turned down the volume. He focused on the match as if feeling it for the first time. The fibrous grain of the wood, the low, dull vibration of its particles. His intent was simple and precise, to break the bonds holding the wood's fibers together, then reorder them into the crystal lattice of iron. That was the essence of the Arcanist's method, to use will and inner magic to restructure matter. Magic flowed through him quietly. The wood's brown faded to a cold silvery gray, the rough surface smoothed, the chunky head contracted and elongated. In under 3 seconds, the match became a perfect, gleaming needle, smooth-bodied and razor-sharp, lying benignly on Jason's desk and catching a chill glint from the sunlight. Professor McGonagall paused above his desk. For an instant, the classroom seemed to hush with her stillness. Her gaze moved from the needle to Jason, noting his calm breathing and composed posture. "Well done. 5 points to Gryffindor." Her voice was measured, but the surrounding students stared in stunned silence. Hermione's eyes widened. She had heard no mouthed spell, seen no dramatic wand flourish. The end-of-class bell rang and the room erupted into movement as pupils packed up and filed out. "Jason, how did you do that? That was incredible." Harry leaned in, stunned. "You didn't even say anything." "Mr. Lester, please stay for a moment," Professor McGonagall said, stopping Jason as he rose. He motioned to Harry and Ron to go on, and Hermione shot him a worried look before following the others out. The classroom emptied quickly until only McGonagall and Jason remained. She picked up the silver needle, weighing its temperature and texture between her fingers. Nonverbal spellcasting, she said. This is an advanced technique normally taught in the 6th year. I doubt your beginner's guide covers any of this. Your preparation is excellent, but it should not be this skilled. Jason met her gaze without defiance. I think spells are a crutch for the will, Professor, he said. If your will is focused enough, you can sense the object you want to change. The words become unnecessary. 19. Selling theories to professors and selling hope to squibs. Is transfiguration about changing the substance itself or merely reshaping the fundamental units that compose it? Jason's voice echoed through the empty classroom. Professor McGonagall picked up the smooth silver needle from the desk and weighed it in her fingertips, feeling the metal's characteristic coldness. Units? She repeated. An interesting but dangerous Muggle concept, Mr. Lester. The essence of magic is the caster's will acting on reality. We use our will to compel objects to change, not to negotiate a rearrangement with them. But what if the will needs a point of action? Jason asked. It's not that my will is stronger than others, he explained. I can perform silent casting because I can perceive the inner essence of that matchstick. I don't force it so much as communicate with it, coaxing it to become a stronger, sharper form. McGonagall fell silent. She set the silver needle down with a crisp clink. What you describe sounds more like an old alchemical practice than ordinary transfiguration. Tell me, in which restricted section manuscript did you read about this? I haven't, Professor, Jason admitted frankly. I worked it out myself. At first, it was just a way to control my magic better, but then I realized it gives a deeper understanding of how magic works. McGonagall straightened and paced several steps in front of the podium, her dark green robes whispering over the stone. Her expression was serious. She was weighing this theory against its risks. A first year proposing an idea that could unsettle the foundations of transfiguration, she muttered. She stopped and looked back at him. This is highly irregular, Mr. Lester. You must understand. History of magic is full of brilliant youngsters with grand ideas, and most of them ruin themselves in the process. That's why I need your guidance, Professor. Theory needs verification. It needs authoritative scrutiny. Jason bowed slightly. The small gesture softened McGonagall's clipped features. Write everything down, your theory and your so-called meditation method, and submit it to me. She folded her hands, recalling the boy's unusual capabilities from before term began. I want rigorous logic, repeatable steps, and clear argument. Hogwarts does not encourage unfounded fantasies. If your paper fails my review, I expect you never mention this again. Of course, Professor. I'll have it before the weekend. After leaving the Transfiguration classroom, Jason turned smoothly into the cold, damp corridor leading toward the caretaker's office. The air thickened, and droplets seeping from the ancient walls reflected the torchlight. He knocked on the office door 3 times, neither too light nor too heavy. A rustle from within, and the door opened a crack. Filch's wrinkled face peered out, wary and impatient. When he saw Jason, his expression shifted into something more complicated. What is it? Filch asked. I've brought what you asked for, Jason said. Filch glanced down the empty corridor, then stepped aside to let him in. The office smelled of old parchment, leftover cat food, and the metallic tang of disciplinary tools. Shackles and whips gleamed unpleasantly in the lamplight. Jason laid a carefully sealed roll of parchment on the cluttered desk. Filch did not take it immediately. He rubbed his chapped hands, eyes clouded but bright with a new hope. I tried what you gave me, Filch said, sounding tired and a little incredulous. I felt something, right here. He jabbed a trembling finger at his temple. A disturbance, like a sound in my head. It was faint, but it was there. I almost had it. The decades of suppressed longing in him surfaced like a geyser. That's normal, Jason said. Mental power in most people has been undeveloped for a long time. He pushed the roll of parchment forward. This next part teaches you how to harness that disturbance, how to condense it. Filch snatched the parchment and unrolled it greedily, lips moving silently as he tried to memorize every line. His face flushed. Is that all? What about the rest? He demanded. The rest requires a research fee, Jason said calmly. Pay? Filch's expression twisted. Are you taking me for a fool? You want money? 10 galleons per stage, Jason replied evenly, as he had the day before. If you provide detailed practice feedback, I can discount you. My research needs living examples. I need an undeniable success story. A guinea pig, Filch snarled, crinkling the parchment in his hand. But beneath the sneer was something else. Hope. A guinea pig who can bring hope to squibs, who can disprove the whole ridiculous bloodline theory to the magical world. Jason's voice was steady. Your success would be worth more than 10 galleons. Filch's breathing quickened. He stared at Jason, torn between longing and pride. After a long silence, he fished 10 galleons from his purse and laid them on the desk with a series of dull clinks. Deal, he muttered through clenched teeth. Jason picked up the coins and turned for the door. Filch's heavy, hopeful breathing followed him down the corridor. As he stepped into the main passage, someone barreled into him, bringing with her the scent of paper and the faint metallic tang of ink. Jason? Hermione was carrying a stack of books taller than her head, her brown curls a little disheveled, having clearly run. She was out of breath, cheeks flushed from the sprint. I've been looking for you everywhere, she panted. After Transfiguration class, I overheard you talking about that unit theory to Professor McGonagall. She produced a thick volume of Introduction to Muggle Studies, almost like a trophy, flipped to a page and jabbed it at him. This is almost exactly like Muggle atomic theory. They discovered ages ago that matter is made of atoms, and atoms of even smaller particles. Magic and science could be connected at the most fundamental level. Does your meditation method explain this? You didn't cast a spell. How did you do it? Will you teach me? She fired questions at him so fast there was no pause for answering. Jason looked at her, the hunger for knowledge in her eyes, and found himself smiling. He drew another blank roll of parchment and a quill from his pocket. Of course, you're my partner now, aren't you? He quickly wrote the core steps of the basic meditation method and handed the sheet to her. Hermione pressed the parchment to her chest like something precious, curls bouncing as she nodded. Of course, I'll start tonight. This is amazing, Jason. This could change everything. 20. Flying Lessons for Geniuses. How to Defeat Your Opponents. On an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the first-year students gathered on the lawn outside Hogwarts. Dozens of broomsticks lay in a row on the grass, mostly old shooting stars and comets. To Jason, they looked more like crude alchemical contraptions than proper magical instruments. The runes carved along the shafts were simple and blunt, their levitation and propulsion arrays basic, inefficient, and flaky. He could sense energy leaking at connection points where years of use had worn the circuits thin. My goodness, these brooms are older than the junk in my attic, Ron muttered beside him, scuffing one with his toe. Its tail bristles were thin and ragged. Doesn't matter so long as it flies, Jason said. He stretched out a thread of attention and probed the broom's rudimentary magic, simple stuff, but readable. Hermione, clutching the textbook to her chest, recited what it said in the book with practiced precision. The key to the flying charm is resonance between the caster's will and the broom. You must convey the intention to rise so the broom can recognize and obey it. Madame Hooch swept across the lawn in her gray riding habit, short hair whipping in the breeze, hawk-like eyes taking in every student. Everyone, stand by your brooms. Now! Her voice cut through the chatter. The lawn fell quiet, and the pupils scrambled into position. Stretch out your right hand above your broom and shout, "Up! Up!" Dozens of voices rose at once. Jason's broom obediently popped into his hand as if grabbed by an invisible force. Harry's did the same, decisively. Hermione's only rolled half-heartedly on the grass. She called again, louder, and it jumped a mere half-inch before clattering back. Ron's reacted far too eagerly, springing up and smacking him hard on the bridge of his nose. He yelped and clutched his face. Nearby, Draco Malfoy gave a sharp laugh, and Crabbe and Goyle grinned along. Madame Hooch ignored the sniggers and began the basics of mounting and balance, but Neville Longbottom seemed not to hear a word. His face was flushed, and he gripped his broom so hard his knuckles were white. Before the whistle blew, he pushed off and rose into the air in a panicked lurch. "Come back, child!" Madame Hooch shouted, but it was too late. Neville flailed. The broom carried him in a terrified, erratic arc. He screamed and then slipped from the handle. Jason's wand was up the instant his attention tracked Neville's fall. He fired a silent levitation charm toward the boy's path. In his head, he ran the numbers: Neville's weight, the speed of his fall, the kinetic energy that would build, then tried to shape the spell into a gentle counterforce. The charm put up a slight resistance, but it was too weak to stop a high-speed impact. The makeshift cushion broke under the load, and Neville hit the grass with a dull thud. Madame Hooch ran over, pale. "Dislocated wrist," she said after a quick check. She helped Neville to his feet while he sobbed. "I'm taking him to the hospital wing. Stay where you are and do not touch your brooms. If I return and anyone's taken to the sky, they'll be out of Hogwarts faster than you can say Quidditch." She hurried off with Neville. For a moment the lawn was deathly quiet, then Malfoy's sneer broke it. "Did you see his stupid face? What an oaf," he said, bending to pick up a small glass sphere from the spot where Neville had fallen. Neville's remembrall. "Give it to me, Malfoy," Harry demanded, stepping forward. Malfoy's lips twisted into a malicious grin as he weighed the remembrall in his hand. "I think I'll put it somewhere fun for Longbottom to find. How about the roof?" "Hand it over." Harry advanced, but Malfoy only smirked, mounted his broom, and shot into the air, level with the highest oak branches. "Want it? Come and get it, Potter." "Harry, no," Hermione cried, panic in her voice. "You'll get into so much trouble. Expelled." But Harry was already up on his broom and streaking after Malfoy. His movements were smooth and confident. He and his broom moved as one. Hermione watched him anxiously, then flicked a glance at Jason, who stood motionless by his broom. He showed little expression, but there was a calmness about him that made her uneasy. Something powerful and unreadable simmered under the surface. Up in the air, Harry closed on Malfoy with ease. His flying was clean and practiced. Malfoy taunted as he wove away, but the play turned clumsy on his side as Harry kept pace, and every dodge grew more desperate. Failing to shake Harry, Malfoy's expression hardened. With a sudden, mean twist, he flung the remembrall high into the sky, then angled to dive back toward the crowd. Jason's eyes tracked Malfoy's motion. He saw trajectory, speed, mass. The boy and his broom converted into a stream of clear figures. A leglocker curse would be crude, an expelliarmus too obvious. He wanted something neater. "It seems some people need a practical lesson on gravity," he murmured, so quietly only Ron and Hermione near him heard. A whisper of arcane energy leaked from his fingertips and rode the air like a silk thread. It slipped across the distance and attached itself to Malfoy as he came down at speed. Mid-dive, Malfoy suddenly felt his body go heavy, weight pressing from all sides. An invisible force pinched his will and strangled his magic in an instant. The broom's levitation runes screamed and died under the strain. "What the?" he began, and then he dropped. Malfoy and his broom lost lift and plummeted straight to the ground. He landed face first on the lawn in a humiliating heap, forehead pressed to the damp grass, hands splayed weakly before him in a perfect accidental prostration. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then Ron gaped. "Whoa," he stammered. "Is he bowing to the grass?" The Gryffindors exploded in laughter, some doubled over, some clapping their thighs. The Slytherins tried to keep it in. Sneers and suppressed snorts betrayed them. Hermione whirled to look at Jason, wide-eyed. That wasn't any spell in the books. It wasn't even a known charm. It felt like something more fundamental, manipulating the underlying flow of power itself. The meditation theory Jason had taught her made sense now in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Amid the commotion, Harry arced in a graceful dive and caught the remembrall cleanly, less than a foot above the ground, landing with the quiet, perfect ease of someone who belonged at the top of the class. His classmates roared. Cheers and shouts rose from the Gryffindors. "Harry Potter!" they cried.